Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi, welcome back to the lecture series on basics of working drawing. Today in this particular module, we will be looking at the plans preparation. So, how do we prepare plans? And this is the part 1 of the lecture series. So, part 1 of plan preparation, wherein we will particularly look at foundations and floor plans, right. So, let us start. So, looking at the floor plans. So, when we look at plans, these are basically the initial stage of any architectural project's journey. So, when as an architect you are doing the first stages of plan, you will be drawing the preliminary set of drawings, wherein there may not be lot of details in there, but you are identifying the kinds of rooms that you will have, the places or the placement of the room, the zoning of the room, the zoning of that layout, the zoning of that particular plan you will do, right. What are things are to be put in there in certain rooms or certain spaces, all of that you will decide and create a preliminary set of drawings which will have minimal amount of details. These set of drawings are the preliminary objective of these set of drawings is to convey your ideas as architect, and they are particularly not being focusing on the construction methods or the construction and execution of this building which you are planning, right. So, to do the construction of certain buildings or to have good for construction drawings, you will need to do detailed working drawing sets which will be based on the preliminary drawings which you will have, right. So, these will include all the plans that you have done, the details that will be required to execute certain niche kind of special details which you have created in the plan, in the floor plan, or some special kind of construction requirement which is required for the completion of the project. So, all of this is to be mentioned in the working drawing set, and a working drawing is drafted at various stages of the project. So, in different stages of the project you will do the working drawing set, a module for the complete floor or even for a single room or even for a single space which is to be developed in that particular building, right. And these are to be enhanced and edited and amended till they are found good for construction or they are fit for construction. Only be considered fit for construction if they have the necessary types of notations which are there and it is in the proper format which we have discussed in the previous 2 lectures, right, of this series. So, moving on forward. So, in a floor plan, when you look at a floor plan, so floor plan of a project evolves from different changes coming from different comments, coming from different suggestions which come from all the stakeholders, all the people who are involved in the process of the development of a building, right. Now, who are these people? They are the client or the structural consultant or the plumbing consultant or the HVAC consultant, so and so forth. So, all of these people are the key parties or the key stakeholders who will be responsible and participate in the completion of this development project along with the architect, right. So, all of them are going to require some or the other type of working drawings or will provide some or the other type of working drawings for the completion of the project. What is the difference between a preliminary set of drawings and you look at working drawings? So, in the preliminary set of drawings, usually you only have the ground floor plan, the first floor plan or the upper level floor plans if there are multiple floors on top of it, and all of the floors vary, they do not have a typical layout. Then you will have the different upper floor plans and you will have the final roof or the terrace plan. So, these are the minimum number of plans which are required. Apart from this in the preliminary drawing set, there will be some preliminary elevations and some preliminary sections which will be there. Maybe some blown out sections and plans will also be there, right. But in the initial stages you will only have 1, 2, 3 components which are extremely important. These are the basic preliminary drawing sets which will be required for the execution of the working drawings of the same area, of the same building, right. Now, how does it differ when we look at the working drawing set? In a working drawing set, you go underground to do the foundation plan, you will represent the ground floor plan, you will represent all the details of the upper floor plans and the roof and terrace plan as well. Along with all of these, there will also be different types of structural drawings. There will be drawings for beams, there will be drawings for columns, there will be drawings for foundation footings, there will be drawings for different types of sumps which will be there. We will be talking about this in detail as we move through the module today, right. So, what are the stages? How do we go about the development of the construction drawing, right. So, firstly we develop the preliminary drawings as we discussed here, right. We develop the preliminary drawings as architects and we go for a client review. We either invite the client to our office or we go as architects to the client and then we discuss the drawings, right. So, the preliminary sketches and the drawings that we have done, which may be single line, double line. So, we go to the client and discuss this. Now, there the client may say that these are some of the things which are required to be modified. So, say the sizes of the room are to be changed, the height of the ceiling is to be changed, the placement of windows is to be changed, the placement or access of the room which wherein you will be placing the door is to be relocated somewhere else. The type of door is to be changed, instead of a swing door you will have a sliding door. So, these kind of changes and modifications require certain degree of client comments and client approvals. Once you have that, once these are approved by the client, you have amended them in the preliminary drawings and the client has approved that new set of drawings which you have created with the client suggested changes. Once the client approves it, then you approach to a structural consultant and start involving the structural consultant in the detailing of your preliminary drawings, right. So, here in this process what happens is several times the structural members which you have considered, the structural components of the building which you have considered, like the column, the beams, the foundation which will be there, the placement of the footing which will be there. So, all of these things get tweaked a little bit, they change a little bit, right. So, maybe the dimension of the column will change a little bit, the depth of the beam will change a little bit, right. So, these things are in the purview of the this expertise comes from the structural consultant. So, structural consultant provides all the information regarding this, and once you have the structural consultant's input, you get the final working drawings which are there, right. Now, these working drawings are enhanced further with correct annotation on the site in consultation with the structural consultant. So, both the architect and the structural consultant need to go to the site, need to come back, agree on a simple annotation template, and then these annotations are introduced in the working drawing to make a good for construction drawing, right, a drawing which is fit for doing execution on site, right. So, these are the things which are done. So, how do we develop a plan, right. So, we do have sites which sometimes look like this, right. So, we have a rhombus shaped site here, right. So, there is a different kind of a site, I think it is probably trapezoidal, but there is a layout or there is a site which has this much of an area, right, 1711.35 square feet is the area, right. Now, throughout all the modules, this is something that I wanted to mention. Throughout all the modules, we will interchangeably talk in terms of interchangeably have used examples which come from feet and inches and which come from millimeters and meters. So, the unit changes, but something to be remembered is all the drawings are to be done in the same unit, right. So, this is just an example, right. So, we go to the site plan, right. A site plan is created at first and this helps in studying the site and its surrounding. As we discussed in the previous module about the site plan, all the components which are there in the site plan are used here In addition to that, the plot measurements, the area of the plot as mentioned here, the dimensions on all 4 sides, the orientation of the site, right, that is to be mentioned, any road of which is on the site and their width and their name, right, the location is also to be mentioned, and any structures which are to be retained or demolished, or the trees which are to be retained or demolished need to be mentioned on the complete site plan, right. So, this is the very first thing that an architect does when he gets the layout of that particular site, right. So, after retaining that, then you start doing the preliminary drawings, right. So, what do you do in the preliminary drawings, right? After the site plan is ready with you, you do the floor plans, right. The floor plans are developed. So, what are the key elements in that? So, the key elements which are to be done prior to you do structural intervention, right. So, all of the things which are to be mentioned before you introduce the location of columns, beams and shear walls, or columns, beams and walls which will take up the lift. So, all of that is introduced in the preliminary drawing by the structural consultant. So, prior to that, what all will be there is visible in this kind of a drawing, right, this example. So, this is a preliminary floor plan. What does the preliminary floor plan have, right? So, it will have the tentative column sizes and the location of the columns, right, whether the column are to be flushed or not to be flushed with the wall, that is to be mentioned. Now, in this particular case, we do not see any column coming out, the only 4-5 columns that we see are in the front edge. So, 1, 2, 3, 4 are the columns that we see in the front edge, right, but others inside the building, inside the brick walls, we do not see any column which is being mentioned. So, the structural consultant, when he gets involved with the drawing and development of this project, then at that time he will introduce the location of columns, right. Next, what is to be mentioned? What will be the wall size thickness, right. So, the thickness of the wall is to be mentioned, the thickness of the concealments are to be mentioned, the beam, where the beam will come, where the how deep will be the beam, whether it will be covered with some kind of a finish, that is to be mentioned in the preliminary drawing. Next, we will have the overhand projections and depths. Now, if you observe this area and this area, right. So, probably on top of this area there is a overhang, there is something which is protruding outwards. On top of this area as well, there is something that is protruding on the upper floor, there is something that will be protruding outwards. There is something that is protruding here as well, and maybe there is a large terrace which is on top of this, right. So, all of this is to be mentioned in dotted lines with its depth and length, right. So, that the structural consultant can have an understanding whether that kind of cantilever, that kind of projection is feasible or not in your given condition, right. And any other projections which are there, which will be specifically for elevation and ornamentation, right. So, all of these overhangs and external projections are to be mentioned in the preliminary drawing, right. Next, you move to the foundation plan. So, you do a initial foundation plan which is there, which will be further detailed out by the structural consultant. So, what are things are there? In a preliminary architectural drawing, a foundation plan or a column layout is also given, right. Therein you have a foundation plan, you have a column layout, you have a beam layout, you have the footing design layout, right. So, all of these things are to be mentioned, which is like the initial idea of the architect's office, what are the things that will be used in this development of the specific building which is under development, right. So, these drawings are made by the structural engineer in reference with the architectural drawing. So, in the initial architectural drawing you can give the location and placements, however, the structural engineer and the structural consultant who will be involved with the project can take a complete liberty of changing the things that an architect has proposed, right. Next, we have the foundation plan, right. In the foundation plan, what all are the things that we include? We include the footing size of all the columns, right. So, all the columns that we see here, all the footing sizes are being mentioned, right. The center to center dimension of every footing between the center to center of the columns are to be mentioned. Like for example, here you have a 12,000 mm or 12 meter long distance between, which is a center to center distance between center line 1 and 4, right, and between center line 1 and 2 you have a 6 meter difference. So, all of this is to be mentioned on all sides, right, or at least on 2 sides, and there needs to be a check dimension, which is the complete dimension of the center to center distance between all the columns which are there, and also intermediary distances which are there between 2 consecutive columns, 2 consecutive set of the columns in the grid of the column, right. So, next is the grid measurements. As I was mentioning, grid measurements are important, and they are to be mentioned and followed as per the architectural drawing, meaning that once in the previous example, if we see, once we have provided a dimension for this width and this length of the building, that your building will be of this dimension, the structural engineer will keep it as a boundary within which he will do all the changes. So, in an architectural drawing as well, the dimensioning is very important, right. So, the preliminary dimensions along with the interior and exterior dimensions are to be mentioned. The building dimensions as per the architectural drawing are to be mentioned. That is what we were talking about, right. Moving on further, right. So, in here you will also have a zoomed in layout that shows the column name and column footing. So, here is the column name C3, C3, C1, right. So, type of column which is there, right, and type of footing which is there. So, here you have a different kind of footing which is F4 and F4, right, and F1 is a different kind of footing altogether, right. So, two ways of annotating the the footing of the building, right, footing and the column of the building, right. Next, you will have the size of each of the footing. This will go in the schedule of the footing. We will come to the schedule later on, right. Then you have the column to column center line distance, which is also to be mentioned, right, and next you will have the dimension of the grid line, right, dimension from the grid line of both the columns and the footings, right. So, how far is it from the center line? So, this dimension is to be mentioned, right, on all sides. So, this is quite important to identify if any of the footing is a bit off centered than the center line, right. It is not in the center of the center line. This is something very important and will result in the structural stability or instability of that particular building which you are doing, right. So, it is a very important thing to be checked, and it also ensures the safety of the safety and structural integrity of the particular building which you are doing. Now, in the schedule, what all do we have in the schedule? The sizes, the length, breadth and depth of the footing is being mentioned, right. So, for example, if we have an example of footing 1 which is here, so the footing 1 is about 7 feet in length, 6.5 feet in breadth and about 2.5 feet in depth, right. So, these dimensions are mentioned here, right. Along with that, what are the types of rebar that are being used? What is the type of steel that is being used inside? That is also mentioned, the length and the width of the rebar, right. So, here your footing schedule must mention the size of each of the footing, the annotation where you have given F1, F2, F3, so on and so forth. This is also to be mentioned, and the number of bars and their diameters are to be mentioned, right. In each of the footing placement, what are the number of bars that will be mentioned? So, that is the number of bars, and that is the dimension, that is the diameter of the bar that is to be mentioned, right. So, that is in that goes in the footing schedule, right. Following on that, in the footing layout as well, you also have the footing detail, wherein a preliminary understanding of where the footing bars will be located and how they will be laid out, that is being mentioned. So, what happens in y axis, what happens in x axis, that is to be mentioned in this case, right, with the x and y dimensions in there. Also, you can also give a preliminary footing section, that how the footing will look like when it is cut in section. So, where will be the position of stirrups, how much will be the thickness on the side, right, from the rebar, what will be the depth of the PCC, what will be the depth of the soling which will be put on ground before you put the PCC. So, all of these things can be mentioned, and these are also enhanced further. In most cases it is done by the structural engineer, but if an architect's office is also capable of doing this, they have a structural consultant in house, they do a initial layout of that, and then the external structural consultant who is involved with the project also develops this further. So, this detail is quite important at least till the first floor level, right. So, at least till the first floor level, from where it starts repeating the layout of the column, till that point it requires to be mentioned in case of a footing layout, right, or a footing detail. Further, once you reach the ground level, you will also have the plinth beam layout, right. So, in the plinth beam, all of these things are to be mentioned, right. So, in this layout you will have the plinth beam layout, which will include names of all the plinth beams which are there. So, annotation and naming of all the plinth beams which are there. So, often it is mentioned as this, that it is plinth beam 4, plinth beam type 3, plinth beam type 2, plinth beam type 5, plinth beam type 1. So, this is basically the dimension of the plinth beam. So, this is the length of the plinth beam. So, this is plinth beam type 1, there is one number of this type of a beam. This is plinth beam type 3, where the thickness probably is changing. This is plinth beam type 4, where the width and the thickness remains same as this beam and this beam. That is why both are named plinth beam 4, PB4, right. Plinth beam 3 remains here, but probably this also changes because the dimension has changed. So, this will be another type of a beam which will be PB something, right. So, likewise you have each of the plinth beam which is named, and all the details are to be mentioned on the side, right. They should also follow the architectural drawings grid layout, right. So, initially what we have done in the architectural drawing, so this one, right. So, in the similar fashion, wherever the beams are required, that are being mentioned here. So, the plinth beams will be mentioned here, right. So, all of the details will be put down in here, right. Along with that, you also need to have the footing layout of the building, right. It is designed on the basis of the footing layout. So, you will have footing right down underneath here, right, likewise, but that is underground, right. Here you are talking about plinth level, you are already some feet above the ground level, right. So, an additional thing which is required in the plinth beam layout is the section of the plinth beam, right. For the typical section of a plinth beam, or if the beam changes, like in this case you will have PB1, PB2, PB3, PB4. So, each of the each of the plinth beam will have a say this is PB1 section. So, this will be PB1. Similarly, you will have PB2, similarly you will have PB3, so and so forth. This is required because the dimension, the section will change, right. Maybe the width changes or the depth changes based on the length of that particular beam, right. So, how do we read the annotation which is inside? So, if we look at the first one, which is 3-16 #, in other scenarios you also sometimes have 3-16 mm. So, here what does it represent? It represents 3 number of bars, 1, 2, 3 number of bars which are of 16 mm diameter, right, which are there on the top. The same thing is probably also happening down. You have 3 number of bars with 16 mm of diameter. So, that is mentioned at the bottom, and here you have 8 mm of bars with 150 C-C. So, what does it mean? It means 8 mm of bars, they are placed at 150 mm 50 mm distance from center to center, meaning in this case it is say 150 mm here. So, they are placed 150 mm center to center like this, and there are 8 number of bars which are of 8 mm size. So, this is one way of representing what is the situation in that particular case inside, because you can never see what type of steel is there inside once it has been covered with concrete. So, that is why this is very, very important. Okay. Moving further, so when we are doing a structural layout, right, when we are doing a floor plan or a detail of a column layout inside floor plan, then what all are the things that a detailed floor plan must include. So, based on the structural column layout which we talked about previously, the detailed architectural drawing is then developed. So, from this point onwards we start getting into the working drawing phase. Say your client has already approved that yes, you are good to go ahead with all the changes that I have recommended, you have changed all the room sizes and things like that. Then you have gone to the structural consultant, you have discussed this with the consultant and he has recommended 1 or 2 changes in the positions of the columns and beams. He has provided a layout of that beams, he has provided the thickness and dimensions of the columns. So, all of these things are to be included in the updated plan. So, in the updated plan, in the detailed floor plan, what all things must be there? The side boundary and the dimensions of the side boundary need to be there, right. That is a very important thing which is to be mentioned there. Then the accurate external and internal measurements of walls need to be there, right. So, here also you will see that there is a line which goes inside showing the interior dimension of the room and there are exterior dimensions of the room as well, right. So, same way for all the different rooms that you have, you will have a interior and exterior dimensions which are to be mentioned, which need to be accurate and they need to add up in the total tally of all the dimensions that you will have. Meaning that all of these part dimensions which are mentioned here need to add up together to create the final dimension, which is the total length of that particular dimension or the side of the building, right. That needs to be checked for accuracy, right, because it is going to be a detailed floor plan. Then you need to have the floor plan for all levels of building. In case of a typical floor plan, something like a floor layout which is this, which is for a residential building, probably 10 or 12 story after the first floor, there it may not be required, but if there are changes on upper floors, it may be required. So, all levels which have changes, all levels that are different to each other, they are not typical, they will require a separate sheet of the detailed floor plan, right. So, all levels of buildings are to be represented in a detailed plan format. Then you may also have tentative layout of the flooring or the furniture which is to be placed in that spaces, in those rooms which you have designed. So, there it can be both loose and fixed furniture which will be provided when you are doing execution itself of the building. All of those things can be provided directly in the detailed floor plan in the initial stages. Then you need to label all of the areas, all of the different areas which you have identified in this case. For example, here there is a bedroom, here there is another bedroom, there is a passage here, there is a living room here, there is another bedroom here, there is a toilet inside, there is a kitchen here. So, all of these details, the nomenclature, the room names and labels are to be highlighted and mentioned, right, with the dimensions underneath, right. Next, you need to have the final doors and window positions and sizes, meaning that once the client has approved, you need to double check and fix the positions of windows and doors which will be adequate and are approved by the client. So, they are to be mentioned with their sizes and positions. The schedule of joinery, the schedules of doors and windows are also to be attached along with this, meaning that you need to identify the various different types of windows and doors that you have. You need to create a schedule of doors as we have discussed in the previous module, and create a schedule, mention that schedule along with the drawing, wherein you have the nomenclature like D1, D2, D3 for doors, W1, W2, W3 for windows, so on and so forth, right. Appropriate hatches and their legends are to be mentioned. For example, in this case you are mentioning it is mentioned that there is a different type of tiling here and it is represented by a oblique hatch, right. So, this kind of hatch is being used in case of the balcony or areas which are not completely enclosed, it has at least one side open to the external environment, right. So, these are the places where there is a different kind of tiling which is being used. So, this will also be mentioned in the legend that we will be providing in the main drawing, right. So, this probably is a different type of tile, maybe a anti-skid tile which is being used in this particular location of the balcony or the exterior drying balcony, right. So, that is to be mentioned explicitly with appropriate hatches. And lastly, the sump location. So, if you have a ground floor plan or if you have a basement plan, where will the sump go? Where will be the underground water tank going? Where will be the underground level or the basement level sump going to pump out the excess water which is collected there? That needs to be located, right? That is a compulsory thing which is to be put in place. When we look at the detailed blown up area of a particular floor plan, the way to do dimensions is also mentioned, right? So, what all things are represented through the dimensions, that is something which we will see. The first thing is we see building outer to outer dimensions, right. So, we go from external this point to external this point on all sides, building outer to outer dimension. Then outer column to center dimension. The next one is center to center dimension. So, you will see a difference here and here, right. So, there is a difference there. So, here you are looking at center to center dimensions. You look at center to center dimensions between two columns or the outermost columns which are there. Next, you will have the column grid dimensions. So, where the columns are placed, you will have a marker here, right. So, that is column center to center dimension, right. And then you will have an outer wall dimension. What are the lengths for which you have to construct a brick wall? That is also to be measured in dimensions, right. So, this is another part of the building, this is one part of the building where probably this is a toilet and a bathroom or a bathroom and a toilet or whatever, or a storeroom and a bathroom. So, maybe some of these kind of spaces are occupied here, we do not have a nomenclature. So, here are the dimensions 5 feet and a half, right. So, that is what is representing the length of the wall that you will be constructing in this part of the building. Similarly, on the interior side as well, you say 8 foot 7.5 inches is the length for which you will be constructing this wall, and it is measured on both ends, right. So, which is very important. So, this is the way we represent the outer wall as well as the inner masonry wall dimensions, as we are talking about now. Interior and outer wall dimensions are to be mentioned. Next, we need to have the door width in most of the cases. If we do not have the D1, D2, then the door widths are also to be mentioned. The cutout which will be done for the door or the area which will be left non constructed or not touched with masonry will be marked for placement of the door element, right. So, these are the things that are to be mentioned. Later on in the detailed drawing, you will have the D1, D2, D3 schedule or W1, W2, W3 for windows schedule, but in the masonry layout you will have to introduce all of these different dimensions, right. So, in the initial stages, this is how a floor plan will look like, right. You do not have the furniture in here, you do not have the placement of the door window schedule or door window annotation, you just have interior dimensions, exterior dimensions, the hatching of the wall component, brick wall component, and the hatching of the columns which are there placed in different places. You do not even have the tiling which is here, right. So, that is very important. So, that happens on this level, right. So, this is dimensioning of all the interior and exterior components of the floor plan, right. Moving on further, we will have hatches. So, in every level the kind of material changes, right. So, the hatch in a plan is necessary to represent various materials that will be there to understand the drawing better, right. It should not so happen that we are doing a simple singular type of hatch. So, what the person who will be executing the site may probably understand it or wrongly conceive it that it is the same material which is to be spread all over this place, right. So, to avoid such kind of miscommunication, we use different kinds of hatches, right. So, for an example here, if we see, we have a planter box wherein the landscape component will go, wherein we will plant some grass or some flowers. So, in both of the planter boxes, we are representing it with grass and soil hatch, as we had discussed in the earlier module, right. So, this is one of the most commonly used hatches that is being used. Next is tiling. So, here is probably an accessible area where people can walk on top of, and therefore, it requires tile. So, it is represented by tile hatch. Then you have a masonry wall which is cut in plan. So, this is the masonry wall which is hatched by oblique hatch, and you have the parking paver. So, here you have the herringbone pattern. right. So, with the herringbone pattern, it is much clear that this will be an area where you will be driving a vehicle on top of this, right. So, this is probably a parking area or a drive through, right. So, it is represented that way. Then you will have column or RCC, usually this is dark hatch. So, it is filled up, it is a solid hatch of black or grey or some other colors which the client, which the architect's office or the consultant agrees upon, right. So, it is dependent on the style of the consultant's office or the architect's office. And lastly, there are paver blocks. So, paver blocks are usually represented as hexagonal hatch. There are other ways as well where you can have some certain designs which are being used in a specific way and they can be represented here. But if you are putting down any of these components, these are to be mentioned in a separate hatch altogether, right. And this can be done in type of to represent different type of flooring, walls, paving material, sunken slab and other natural elements such as grass, as we discussed in the planter box case, sand and so on and so forth, right. Any drawing which we are doing must, that has an hatch, right, must also have a legend which explains what that hatch exactly is. If it is not there, the drawing may be subjected to revisions, which is which an architect will have to do again and then send it over to the site for a clarification, right. So, here let us update that previous drawing itself. So, what happens here, as we discussed earlier, the balcony probably is exposed to the exterior side because you will just have a railing on this side and it is exposed on the other end. So, this has a different type of a tile, right. So, your washing your outside area, your balconies, all of these areas will have different types of tiling on them, right. So, that is being represented. Then here there is some sort of sunken area, right, there is a lower lying floor. So, there is a different type of tiling which will happen here. Along with that, there is a sunken slab which is represented, right. So, all these different types of layouts or all these different types of hatches which will be introduced are being mentioned here, right. So, what are these? These are sunken slab 1, this is type 1 of sunken slab which will probably be some deep, right. Then you have the RCC member which is hatched completely in dark, it is a solid hatch. Then you have sunken slab 2 which is represented with a different oblique hatch, different than the masonry wall that we have or the brick wall that we have. Then you have sunken slab 3 which will also represent the different type of sunken slab which is there. So, you have 3 different types of sunken slab, which also means there will be 3 different types of depths for these sunken slabs, right. And then you have the wall component, right. So, in walls you have the interior wall which is not that deeply hatched and there is an exterior wall which is quite thick and is hatched, right. So, there you also get a visual representation of the variation of material that will be used in that particular case, right. Variation of material and variation of sizes and depths which are represented just with a simple hatching pattern, right. Moving on further, the same thing follows on the other side as well, right. So, the same thing is repeated again, and this one particular sign is also important where you are doing a cross. This basically means that there is a duct there, there is a complete cutout in the slab. So, the slab is not there, right, it is not being casted in that particular place, but it is enclosed by walls on all sides or columns on one side and a wall on other 2 sides, or it has an opening on 2 sides as a partition wall and a solid masonry wall on other sides, right. So, these are certain representations that we use to explain the different spaces that we have and the situation that will be there in that particular space in form of a drawing. Moving further, we have a component which is called the sump. So, what is a sump? So, sump or underground sump is usually provided in a design where you need to have a place wherein from where you will either extract water or you will be storing water for later extraction, right. So, if an underground sump is provided in the design, it must be shown in the ground floor plan, right, something like this, right. So, you will show a dotted line that it is there underneath right next to your building. So, this is the building exterior, right, be represented by a cut line, right. So, this is the building exterior wall and right next to the wall you have a RCC sump tank which is there, right. So, a sump, right, walls of the sum should be shown in dotted lines. That is what has been done here, right. Then a separate structural drawing is to be provided for the sum. What will be the dimensions of the sum? Because it is a completely RCC casted structure. So, you need to provide the dimensions of the sum, how deep it will be, how wide it will be, that is to be provided, along with at least one section, right, which will detail out what will be the RCC layout. This usually is provided by the structural engineer who is appointed by the architect's office. So, they provide the sum details, where will be the manhole, where will be the manhole here, whether it will be here, whether it will be here, whether it will be away from here. So, all of these details are provided in the plan as well as the section, okay, in the plan as well as the section. So, these two things are very important in case of a sum. When you look at the levels, this is another thing which is to be explicitly mentioned in a plan, that in a plan you need to have the levels being mentioned clearly, because they represent the variation of different levels that you want the client or want the user of that particular building to experience, right. So, when you are representing those levels in that drawing, it also gives a communication to the reader of the drawing, who might be the person who is executing this location. So, what he will understand, he or she will understand, is that this particular area is probably to be lifted or is to be lifted about 2 feet, right. It helps in understanding what kind of space it will create, and till what extent is there a 2 feet elevated area, till what extent is there a 6 inches elevated location, till what extent is there a 2.5 feet elevated tiled area, right. So, all of these variations in levels and differences are to be mentioned, right. And any space that is divided by a line should have a level, right. For example, if we take up this space, this is divided by a line, right. This is divided by a line. We have not mentioned the levels of the staircase, but in some of the cases you may also mention the levels of the staircase, right. Usually it comes in the section, but in plan also it may be mentioned, right. So, this space is getting divided, this space A star is getting divided by B star, getting divided from B star by a group of staircase. This space, which is star C, is getting divided by this line from the paver block area. So, here you have the herringbone pattern and here you have the paver blocked area. This space is getting divided by this wall, right. The B star is getting divided by, say, M star, which is interior mezzanine, say it is a mezzanine level, right. So, M star is getting divided by B star using this masonry wall. So, all the places where there is a division which is happening between two spaces needs to have a level which is mentioned, right. That is very important. If it is not there, then it may be assumed that both the cases, both the levels are at the same level, right. Both the different finishes that have been proposed in the design are at the same level, right. Next is labeling. All of these labels which we have, different labels that are there to represent the doors, the windows, the dining areas, the kitchens, the bedrooms, right. So, all of these different rooms need to be appropriately given names. Both the length and width of the dimension or the particular room is to be mentioned. Like in this example, you see the bedroom is marked 3100 by 3350 mm, right. So, that is the dimension, it is 3 meters 100 mm in length, and it is 3 meters 350 mm in another dimension, right. So, that is something that is to be understood immediately as we read the sign of the name of the bedroom. It should be mentioned at the bottom. So, what does it do? It declutters the drawing a little bit. If you observe this particular drawing, the dimension lines are not there, right. So, this is also understandable that one dimension is this way, another dimension is the other way, right. So, that is clarified here. Then in case of the kitchen as well, as if you see, the kitchen is kind of in short form, it is just mentioned kit, but it is better that we mention full form, but it can also be represented this way. So, you have a kitchen and you have the dimensions in this way, it is 2.3 meters, which is 2300 mm by 3.1 meters, which is 3100 mm, right. So, this dimension, which is probably 3100 by 2.3 meters, right. So, this is clarified just by mentioning in textual format. So, that is how it simplifies the reader's mind. So, it does not clutter, it simplifies the understanding of the drawing, it does not create a lot of clutter of different sorts of dimension lines, which may create confusion, right. So, that is resolved. Along with that, doors and window nomenclature or annotation can also be introduced. Now, here there is a different type of annotation being followed, that 002 is a nomenclature for a door or the entrance, and then you have interior doors which are mentioned as D1, D2, right. So, these are at least 3 different types of door where you have D, D1, D2, and windows which are of I think 4 or 5 different types, wherein you have W3 here, W5 here, I saw W1, W1 is here, right. So, these are the various different types of windows which will probably repeat in different spaces, like we see W1 getting repeated here, right. So, these kind of repetitions are to be highlighted as well, and they can be referred in the door and window schedule, as we have discussed in the last module, right. Fixed furniture and the loft above, right. All the fixed furnitures and the lofts which are going on top of the floors are to be mentioned explicitly, and the places where there will be overhangs, say for example, there is an overhang on top of this, that is to be represented as well, right. That is to be mentioned as well. Okay. So, furniture. So, furniture, this is again, as I have been repeatedly mentioning, that furniture layout, if it is not fixed, it usually is done by interior design team. If it is fixed, it has to be a additional drawing which will be provided by the architect's office. That is why I have marked it as a optional drawing which is there. But a tentative furniture layout does not harm anyone. So, a tentative furniture layout may be provided by the architect's office, and this particularly helps in understanding of the space, right. So, if a particular type of furniture is being placed here, but on site the realities are quite different and that furniture is not going to get placed, we immediately understand that there is something either wrong with the drawing, or we have not had a clear communication between the consultants and the architects and the client. So, there is some gray area where there is a lack of communication. So, that is where a furniture drawing also helps, right. So, a lot of offices also do furniture drawings as a part of the complete dossier of the working drawing compendium, right. So, along with that, the position of the fixed cabinets, for example, the cabinets which will go underneath the kitchen table, right, underneath the cooking area, they are to be mentioned, right. So, the fixed layout, maybe this is a granite stone which will be put in here, there will be another probably granite stone which will be put in here. So, these fixed items are to be mentioned. Along with that, you may also mention the position of the refrigerator probably which will go here, you may also position that. So, that gives a clarity that okay, the refrigerator will be placed here and not here, right. So, that clarity the client also gets. Okay. So, these are to be given in detail. So, a detailed drawing, a detailed version of this kind of a drawing of furniture layout can be further taken up by interior designer. So, movable furniture should be placed accordingly to the standards, right. So, as I mentioned here, as with the example of the refrigerator, so as per the standards which are available by the manufacturer, that dimension can be provided here. So, that if the client wishes to place this instead of here somewhere else, that can also be done, right. For example, this table probably they do not want the sofa set to be like this, but to be like this. So, this table will be moved a little bit on this end, right. So, they should be provided according to the standard, so that the circulation of this whole space remains free. For example, this dining table is to be reoriented in this way, right, and there will be tables and the chairs will be like this, right. So, that kind of level of freedom needs to be provided if it is not fixed, if the furniture is not fixed. Along with that, the fixtures of the kitchens and the toilets are to be shown. So, where the sink or the basin will go, the sink is here, the basin will go, where will be the shower tower and where will be the water closet or wash closet located, the toilet will be located, that is to be represented in a structured fashion along with the specifications, right. Then we talk about the projections, right. So, projections of the upper floors are to be mentioned explicitly, are to be mentioned clearly, right. So, any projections that are above the plan should be mentioned in dotted lines, and for staircase, wherever the staircase gets cut, the remaining steps should also be shown. For example, in this case you see that there is a single flight which is going up, but of course it will not end up in a wall. You will reach at a mid landing, and from the mid landing you will go on top, right. So, probably this area is not getting cut at the plan level, which is theoretically 4 feet. So, from this point onwards you will have another flight which will be going up, but even that flight which is not visible at this plan level is to be mentioned. There probably is an overhang area or a terrace on the upper floor on top of this parking area. So, that is to be mentioned in dotted lines, right. So, all of the areas which will be also giving sunshade, like the chhajjas on the exterior wall, the protrusions or the elevation treatment that you will be doing, all the overhangs are to be mentioned here, right. Along with that, all the lofts which will be there on the inside, say you have some area to keep some sort of things on the on a stone, right, which is along with a bracket or along with a fixed support which will be infused in the wall itself. Say for example, this area which is a puja shelf, right, where the deities and idols will be kept, and probably this is a stone which will go right into the masonry wall. So, this also needs to be represented. Also a loft which will probably be on top of something which needs to be represented. Along with that, all the cutouts which are there, all the places where there will be a double height, right, that is to be mentioned as well. So, here you see a cutout is being there which is probably double height. So, you can, person who is on the upper floor can also see who is sitting here, right, who is using this space. So, these kind of projections and deletions of the floor need to be mentioned in the floor plan. Moving on forward, you will have different types of doors and windows which are there. They also need to be represented correctly. So, you have at least 5 different types of door which are commonly used. You have a single leaf door, you have a double leaf door where you have 2 swinging panes. You have a bifold door where you will have 2 hinges on each of the door, where the door moves like an accordion and it will be closing like this way or opening like this way, right, which it swings on the side, then it swings on the side, right. So, these are the different kinds of doors that we have. Then you have a door with a window, right. So, you might have a small window wherein you would like to take packages without opening the bigger door, right. So, there is a safety concern, but you also would like to have a big large entrance to the room or to the living room, right. So, therein a door with a window is being used. A sliding door is also possible in case of space quench. So, if you have a smaller space wherein you cannot afford for the opening area to be left out, then in that case you use sliding doors. Similarly, in that case we also have different types of windows. These are 5 examples which we have. Sliding windows, we all know how they look like and how they function. Then we have the double casement window wherein you will have 2 panes which will open outwards and close inwards, right. So, they will close inwards. There is a single casement window as well wherein you will have some sill level which is on the outside, and there is just one pane which will open and close, right. It will swing on one hinge. And then there is fixed glass. You have a permanent fixed glass which is inside a frame, right. So, that is what happens with the doors and windows. Now, when we come to joineries, all the doors and windows which are marked, all of them should be marked in the plan. So, here as we discussed earlier, W1, W2, W1, W1, this is W5, this is W3. So, different types of windows which are being used in the complete floor plan that are to be mentioned. Different types of doors as well, as we discussed earlier, are to be mentioned. Dimensions of the doors and windows are to be mentioned in the schedule. The swing and opening of the window to the correct direction needs to be mentioned. So, here you see that this is the way the door is to be opened and this is the other way where the door is to be opened. The same way an opposite thing happens on the other end, right. So, what are the directions? The correct directions of opening the door and the window are to be mentioned in the correct way. Now, in all of these cases we have all the sliding windows, so that is not a problem, but particularly in case of doors, it is very important. If a door is fixed the wrong way, it is supposed to be replaced by the refixed by the contractor. So, to avoid such kind of mistakes, all of these details are to be mentioned, right. So, in case of the windows, the positions are to be mentioned correctly, and whether they will be flushed with the surface on the inside or the outside is something that is to be mentioned, particularly in case of a toilet window, right. In case of a toilet window, a lot of times there are mistakes where the window pane is kind of being flushed on the inside. Usually it is flushed on the outside, right. And also it depends on the kind of the design that the architects want to follow. So, these are some of the details which one should be very careful about while doing the design. And lastly, a schedule, as we have repeatedly mentioned this, a schedule is a must with a joinery or door and window drawing, right. Next is the schedule of joineries. We have discussed this earlier as well. So, you have the name, the size, the height, the sill level of that particular window in case of a window, and the description of the material or the type of material that will be used to do the window. All of that is mentioned in the schedule of joineries. Next, we have the staircase. So, we have different types of staircase which different conditions or different kind of buildings will have. So, in these, if we look at it from one start, so this is probably a staircase which will be going straight, but try to observe in all of the staircases we have a cut line, right. Now, what does that represent? That represents the level at which a particular staircase is getting cut, right. So, I'll explain two examples. One is the straight staircase, as we had seen in the earlier floor plan example as well, wherein you have a staircase which goes right straight. So, you cut it off at the floor plan level, right. But the same thing, if we look at a U-shaped staircase or a U-shaped landing staircase, wherein you have a mid landing, which is this block, right. So, in that case as well, you cut the staircase at the level at which the floor plan is getting cut. However, you will have to represent the other part which goes on top. This is similar, this will be followed in a 2/4 landing staircase as well, right, wherein you have 2 landings, right. You will have to represent that. It is also true in case of the spiral staircase, which is going up spiral like this, but you will have to introduce a cut line wherein the floor plan is getting cut, and then the remaining part can continue. So, this is a very important thing to be represented in case of a floor plan layout, right, when we are doing staircases. Now, what are the things that are to be mentioned in a staircase plan? When we are just detailing the staircase, what are things are to be mentioned? The number of steps including the landing. So, here we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th is the landing, right. So, that is to be represented clearly. The width of each thread is to be marked. So, where is the width of each thread? So, this 250 mm is the width of each thread, that is to be marked. The masonry walls around the staircase need to be dimensioned. So, all of these are masonry walls, right. So, this is the dimension of the masonry wall, and addition of complete this part would be the other side of the masonry wall, right. So, all of this is to be represented correctly. Okay. The width of each flight and the gap between each flight is to be mentioned, right. So, the width of each flight, how wide is this flight? This is the flight width, this is the flight width. So, all of this is to be mentioned along with the gap in 2 flights, right. So, this is the gap in 2 flights, 450 mm as represented here, and because it represents a cutout, that means there is a complete staircase well which is there inside this. So, there is nothing inside in that area, right. A handrail should also be shown in elevation. So, this is the handrail that you see which goes around, right, and the arrow indicating the direction in which a person will be using the staircase, right. So, this is the upward arrow and this is a downward arrow staircase, right. So, if you are here on this floor, you probably are going downstairs, right. You will be going down from this level, right, and if you are here on this level, you will be going up, and then the level changes from here. How do we understand it? What is the alternative way to understand this? Is in an upward staircase, you will always have a cut line. In a downward staircase, you won't have that, because a downward staircase will always be visible, that depth of the plan will always show the downward staircase. It only gets cut when it is going upwards, right. So, that is a easy representation to understand which type of plan it is, right. So, steps after the break line should also be shown, which are shown in this way, right. They are shown in dotted, right. So, when you include all of this together, this is how the detailed plan starts looking like. You have the staircase, you have the hatches, you have the nomenclature of the spaces, you have the window annotation, you have the doors annotation, you have the finishes annotation, you have the columns being represented correctly, you have all the masonry walls hatched correctly, you have the ducts marked correctly. So, all of these different representations are being correctly put. So, this is what a detailed layout would look like, right. So, that is a complete detail sheet along with the schedules of joineries or schedules of door and windows, which are annotated already in the floor plan to you. Thank you very much.